After 3 years together, Sophie Lombardi dumped me because I was too ordinary for her ambitious lifestyle. She wanted someone with luxury cars, expensive suits, and a prestigious career, not a guy who worked at a small accounting firm and drove a 10-year-old Honda. 6 months later, I was having coffee with my old college roommate when he brought up my recent inheritance news that had been all over the financial networks. "Ethan, I still can't believe you never told Sophie about your family's money," he said, shaking his head. "$1 billion inheritance and she had no clue?" "Why didn't you ever mention it?" I shrugged. "She fell in love with who she thought I was, not my bank account. If she couldn't accept the real Meetha, ordinary Meeth, she didn't deserve to know about the money." Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke from behind me, cold and stunned. "So that's why you never seemed worried about money." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I turned around slowly, my coffee cup freezing halfway to my lips. Sophie stood there in a designer dress I'd never seen before. Her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows of Harmony Cafe. Her emerald eyes, once warm when they looked at me, now held a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like betrayal. My college roommate. Jake cleared his throat awkwardly and excused himself, mumbling something about needing to get back to work. The cafe continued its gentle hum around us, the espresso machine hissing. Conversations flowing, the soft jazz playing overhead, but it felt like Sophie and I were trapped in our own silent bubble. "Hello, Sophie," I said quietly, setting down my cup. "How long were you standing there?" She slid into Jake's vacated chair without invitation, her manicured fingers drumming against the wooden table. "Long enough." Her voice had that sharp edge I remembered from our worst fights. $1 billion, Ethan." "Really?" I studied her face, noting the subtle changes 6 months had brought. Her makeup was more dramatic, her jewelry more expensive, her entire presentation more polished. She looked successful, confident, like she'd finally become the person she'd always wanted to be. "It wasn't relevant to our relationship," I said simply. Sophie let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "Not relevant? Ethan, do you remember the fights we had about money? The way you insisted on going to that tiny apartment in Brookfield Heights instead of the luxury complex downtown? The way you'd suggest we split the check at restaurants while I was trying to network with important people? I did remember. I remembered all of it with painful clarity. Our relationship had started beautifully. I'd met Sophie at a charity auction 3 years ago, where she was working as an event coordinator for her marketing firm. She was stunning, intelligent, and driven everything I thought I wanted in a partner. I was immediately captivated by her ambition and her passion for her career. But somewhere along the way, that ambition had turned into something else, something that made her see me as an obstacle rather than a partner. "I remember you being embarrassed." "By me," I said, my voice steady despite the old hurt rising in my chest. "I remember you asking me to dress better when we went to your work events. I remember you introducing me as just a friend to your boss at that company party." Sophie's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. "I was building my career, Ethan. Image matters in my industry. You have to understand what I understand," I interrupted, "is that you never loved me for who I actually was. You loved the potential of who you thought I could become. The truth was, I had loved Sophie deeply. Deeply enough to hide my family's wealth because I wanted her to love the real Meetha White. The guy who worked at Henderson & Associates accounting firm, wore off-the-rack suits, and drove a 2013 Honda Civic. Not Ethan White, heir to the White Industries fortune. My grandfather had built White Industries from nothing, starting with a small textile factory in the 1960s and expanding into manufacturing, real estate, and technology. By the time he passed away last year, the company was worth billions. But he'd raised me to understand the value of earning your own way, of being humble, of knowing who you really were beneath the money. So I'd lived modestly, worked at a regular job, and tried to build a life based on genuine connections rather than financial advantage. I thought Sophie was that genuine connection. I was wrong. "You made me feel small, Sophie," I continued, watching her fidget with her designer handbag. "Every time you sighed when I ordered a beer instead of wine, every time you suggested I network more or think bigger, Every time you looked at me like I was holding you back from the life you deserved. That's not, she started, but I held up a hand. The final straw was your sister's wedding, I said. Do you remember what you told me in the car afterward? Sophie's face went pale. She remembered. You said you were tired of making excuses for having an ordinary boyfriend. You said you needed someone who matched your ambition, someone who could open doors for you instead of keeping you in small rooms. The memory still stung. We just left the reception at the Grand Ballroom in downtown Millbrook, where Sophie's sister had married a successful investment banker. Sophie had spent the entire evening introducing me to her relatives with apologetic smiles, as if my presence required explanation. Your cousin asked what I did for a living, I recalled, and you actually said, "Oh, Ethan's still figuring things out," like I was some college graduate with no direction, not a licensed CPA with 3 years of experience at a respected firm. Sophie shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely calm. And you know what? I accepted it. I told myself you were just stressed about your career, that you'd see my worth eventually. I made excuses for you the same way you made excuses for me, except mine came from love, and yours came from embarrassment. Ethan, that's not fair. What's not fair? I said, my voice growing stronger, is that I spent 3 years trying to prove I was enough for you, when the truth is, you were never enough for me. Sophie's eyes widened at that. She wasn't used. To me, speaking so directly, so confidently, for 3 years I'd been the accommodating boyfriend, the one who bent and compromised and apologized. I deserved someone who saw my character, my kindness, my loyalty, and thought this man as a prize, I continued. Instead, I got someone who saw those same qualities and thought, this man is settling. The cafe around us had grown quieter as the afternoon crowd thinned out. A barista was wiping down tables nearby, occasionally glancing our way with the practiced indifference of someone who'd witnessed countless emotional conversations over coffee. Sophie sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers still drumming. That nervous rhythm. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. I did love you, Ethan. I still do. But even as she said it, I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was looking at me differently now, calculating, reassessing. The knowledge of my inheritance had changed everything for her, just like I'd always known it would. That's why I'd hidden it. It's not because I was ashamed of my wealth, but because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. Sophie had just proven that my instinct had been correct. 3 weeks after our confrontation at Harmony Caf, I was working late at Henderson & Associates when my phone buzzed with a text from my friend Marcus, not the same Marcus from our earlier discussion, but my coworker. The message contained a link to an Instagram story with the caption, "Your ex is really moving up in the world." I hesitated before clicking the link. 6 months of no contact with Sophie had been peaceful, and our recent encounter had given me the closure I needed. But curiosity won out. The Instagram story belonged to Nora Lewis, one of Sophie's friends from her marketing firm. The video showed a crowded rooftop bar in downtown Millbrook. Expensive cocktails gleaming under string lights, well-dressed people networking and laughing. Then the camera panned to Sophie, stunning in a black cocktail dress, her arm linked with a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit. Sophie and her new beau, celebrating his promotion to senior partner at Goldwater and Associates. Nora's voice announced cheerfully, "Some people just know how to pick winners." My stomach twisted, not from jealousy, but from recognition. I knew that firm. Goldwater and Associates was one of the most prestigious law firms in the state, the kind of place that handled mergers and acquisitions for major corporations, the kind of place that represented clients like White Industries. I screenshot the video and did some quick research. The man was Alexander Patel, 34, recently made senior partner, specializing in corporate law. His LinkedIn profile read like Sophie's checklist: Harvard Law graduate, luxury car enthusiast, member of exclusive country clubs. Featured in the 40 Under 40 business magazine list. Everything I had never been. In her eyes, but what bothered me more than seeing Sophie with her upgrade was Nora's comment about picking winners, as if love was a game of strategic advancement rather than genuine connection. I was still processing this when my phone rang. It was my friend David Chen. No, wait, I need to use a different name. Let me call him Daniel Turner, my buddy from college who worked in marketing downtown. Then you need to see this, Daniel said without preamble. I'm at Mercury Lounge right now, and your ex is here with some guy. She's talking about you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My blood went cold. What do you mean talking about me? She's had a few drinks, and she's telling this whole table about how she dodged a bullet by breaking up with you before she found out about your family money. She's saying she could have stayed with you and lived the easy life, but she wanted to earn her success by being with someone who actually achieved something. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of hurt and anger. Even knowing about my inheritance, Sophie was still spinning the narrative to make herself the hero of our story. There's more, Daniel continued. She's telling everyone that you probably hid the money because you knew you couldn't get a woman like her any other way. That you were emotionally manipulative for not being honest about your wealth. That was the final straw. I'd accepted. Being painted as the ordinary boyfriend who wasn't ambitious enough for her. I'd even accepted being the one who wasn't enough. But I wouldn't accept being called manipulative for protecting my heart. Where exactly is this happening? I asked, already reaching for my car keys. Mercury Lounge, the rooftop section. Ethan. Maybe you shouldn't. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Mercury Lounge gave me time to think about what I wanted to say. For 3 years, I'd swallowed my pride, accepted Sophie's criticisms, and tried to become the man she wanted me to be. For 6 months since our breakup, I'd stayed silent while she moved on with her perfect upgrade. But I wouldn't let her rewrite history to make me the villain. Mercury Lounge was exactly the kind of place Sophie loved upscale, trendy the type, of establishment where young professionals came to see and be seen. The rooftop section buzzed with conversation and laughter, the city lights creating a glamorous backdrop for the evening's networking and socializing. I found her table easily enough. Sophie was holding court with a group of well-dressed people. Alexander Patel beside her with his arm casually draped over her shoulders. She was animated, confident, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Double quotes, ... The whole thing was just so calculating, she was saying as I approached. I mean, who hides $1 billion inheritance from their girlfriend of 3 years? It's like he was testing me or something, which is honestly pretty twisted when you think about it. A woman at the table nodded sympathetically. So? Manipulative. He wanted you to prove you loved him for the right reasons. Exactly, Sophie exclaimed, taking another sip of her martini. And the thing is, I actually did love him for who he was. I tried so hard to make it work, but he was just so content with mediocrity. I needed someone who inspired me to be better, you know? Alexander squeezed her shoulder approvingly. You deserve someone who matches your ambition, babe, I'd heard. Enough. Hello, Sophie. The table went quiet. Sophie's face cycled through several emotions, surprise, embarrassment, defiance, before settling on a forced smile. Ethan, what a coincidence. Everyone, this is my ex-boyfriend I was just telling you about? The group looked at me with undisguised curiosity, clearly trying to reconcile the manipulative billionaire of Sophie's story with the guy in the modest, business casual outfit standing before them. I couldn't help overhearing your story, said my voice calm but carrying clearly over the ambient noise. I thought I should clarify a few things. Sophie's smile grew more strained. There's really nothing to clarify, you said. I hid my inheritance to manipulate you. I continued, addressing the table but keeping my eyes on her. The truth is, I hid it because I wanted someone who would love me without it. Would see my character, my values, my heart, and think those were enough. Alexander shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting to become part of whatever this was. Said you loved me for who I was. I went on. But that's not true, is it, Sophie? You spent 3 years trying to change everything about me. My clothes, my car, my job, my social circle, my ambitions. The only thing you loved about me was my potential to become someone else. Sophie's face was flushing now. Whether from alcohol or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Ethan, you're making a scene. You told these people you dodged a bullet by leaving me. I said, my voice growing stronger. But here's what you actually dodged. You dodged a man who would have loved you unconditionally. You dodged someone who saw your flaws and chose you anyway. You dodged a partner who valued loyalty over image, substance over status. The table was completely silent now, everyone clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken, and you know what you chose instead? I looked at Alexander, who was studiously avoiding eye contact. You chose someone who fits your checklist, someone who looks good on paper and in Instagram photos, someone whose success you can borrow instead of building your own. Sophie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. How dare you? How dare I? What? Tell the truth. I shook my head. Sophie, you can rewrite our story, however. You want for your friends, but we both know what really happened. I wasn't enough for you when you thought I was ordinary. And now that you know I'm not, you're trying to make me the villain for protecting myself from exactly this kind of reaction. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Guys, we both knew I was right. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said finally, but I hope you understand that what you're looking for isn't love. It's a transaction. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Sophie and her perfectly curated life behind. The next morning, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete clarity for too long. I'd been living in the shadow of Sophie's expectations, trying to measure up to standards that were designed to make me feel inadequate. Even after our breakup, some part of me had been carrying the weight of her disappointment, wondering if maybe she'd been right about my lack of ambition, but last night had crystallized something important. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. Made myself coffee in my small but comfortable kitchen. Looking out at the morning light filtering through the windows of my apartment in Brookfield Heights, Sophie had always hated this place, called it beneath our potential. But I loved it. It was quiet, affordable, and mine. I'd chosen it not because I couldn't afford better, but because it felt like home. That was the difference between us. I realized Sophie saw everything, including me, as a stepping stone to something else. I saw things as they were and found value in them as they existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel heard about last night. You okay? I typed back. Better than I've been in years. And I meant it. Around noon, my phone rang. Sophie's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But we needed to finish this conversation properly. Ethan, she said, as soon as I picked up. Her voice was tight, controlled. We need to talk. I thought we said everything we needed to say last night. You embarrassed me in front of my friends. In front of Alexander. I almost laughed. Even now, her primary concern was how she looked. To other people, Sophie, I told the truth. If that embarrassed you, maybe you should think about why. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to the one she used when she was trying to be persuasive. Look, I know we both said things we didn't mean. Maybe we should get together and talk this through properly. There's clearly still something. Between us, no, there isn't. Ethan, come on. You loved me for 3 years. That doesn't just disappear. She was right about that. I had loved her deeply and completely. But love without respect, without acceptance, without genuine compatibility, that wasn't sustainable. It was just prolonged heartbreak. You're right, I said. I did love you. But I loved someone who didn't exist. I loved the version of you that I thought could love me back. The real you made it very clear that I was just a temporary inconvenience. That's not true, Sophie. Let me ask you something. I walked to my living room window, looking out at the ordinary street below. If I didn't have family money, if I really was just a regular accountant with modest goals and simple pleasures, would you want to get back together with me? The silence stretched long enough to be an answer. I thought so, I said softly. It's not about the money, she said finally. But her voice lacked conviction. It's about ambition, about building something together. No, it's about control, I interrupted. It's about being with someone you can mold into your ideal partner instead of loving someone as they are. And that's not love, Sophie. That's a renovation project. I heard her take a shaky breath. So that's it? You're just going to throw away 3 years? I'm not throwing anything away. Choosing to stop trying to recover something that was never really there. Never really there. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. That afternoon, I made a decision that had been building for weeks. I called my friend Jake and asked him to meet me for coffee at a different place this time, a small cafe called Bean, branch in the Arts District. I'm thinking about making some changes, I told him over espresso and pastries. Big ones. Jake raised an eyebrow. What kind of changes? I've been living like I'm apologizing for who I am, I said. Not because of the money, but because I let someone convince me that contentment was the same as lack of ambition. That being happy with a simple life meant I wasn't trying hard enough. And now I think maybe it's time to stop hiding. I took a sip of my coffee, organizing my thoughts. My grandfather left me more than money. He left me a responsibility. White Industries needs guidance, needs someone who understands its values and history. I've been so focused on proving I could make it on my own that I forgot I don't have. 2. Jake nodded slowly. You're talking about taking over the company. I'm talking about stepping into the role I was born for, but doing it on my own terms. I pulled out my phone and showed him an article I'd bookmarked. There's a board meeting next month to discuss the company's future direction. The interim CEO wants to take it public, break it apart, and sell the pieces. My grandfather would have hated that, and you can stop it. As the primary inheritor, I have significant voting rights. But more than that, I have a vision for what the company could become. Sustainable manufacturing, employee profit sharing, community investment all. The things my grandfather believed in but never had time to fully implement. Jake grinned. So you're going from hiding your billions to running $1 billion company? That's quite a swing. The money was never the point, I said. The point is using whatever advantages you have to build something meaningful. I spent 3 years trying to be ordinary because someone convinced me that extraordinary meant flashy and superficial. But extraordinary can also mean purposeful. That evening, I called my family's lawyer and scheduled a meeting for the following week. I called the interim CEO and requested a formal presentation of his plans for the company. I called my grandfather's old business partner, who had been like an uncle to me growing up, and asked for his guidance. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving toward something instead of away from it. 2 days later, I got a final text from Sophie. I saw the Business Journal article about White Industries preparing for new leadership. I hope you know what you're doing, I typed. Back. I do. For the first time in a long time, I really do. Then I deleted her number from my phone. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and this time, it's what I was going to write it myself. 3 months after taking control of White Industries, I found myself in a place I'd never expected, genuinely happy. The transition hadn't been easy. Moving from a small accounting firm to running $1 billion conglomerate was like jumping from a rowboat to commanding a cruise ship. But my grandfather had prepared me better than I'd realized. All those childhood visits to his office, all those dinner conversations about business ethics and employee welfare, all those lessons about leading with integrity rather than intimidation, they'd been an education I hadn't fully appreciated at the time. The White Industries headquarters in downtown Ashford was a testament to my grandfather's values. Instead of a sterile glass tower, it was a renovated historic building with natural light, green spaces, and collaborative work areas. The executive floor where I now worked felt more like a comfortable library than a corporate boardroom. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on my door. Mr. White, Charlotte Taylor from the Environmental Impact Institute is here for your 2 o'clock meeting. I'd been looking forward to this meeting all week. White Industries was launching a sustainability initiative in Charlotte's organization, was consulting on ways to reduce our manufacturing footprint. Her preliminary report had been impressive, thorough, innovative, and refreshingly honest about both challenges and opportunities. Send her in, please. Charlotte Taylor entered my office with a confident stride and a warm smile. She was petite with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a worn leather satchel that looked like it had seen many adventures. Everything about her suggested competence and authenticity. Thank you for taking the time to meet, she said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. I have to say, your grandfather's vision for this company is remarkable. Not many corporations prioritize environmental stewardship the way White Industries has. I gestured for her to sit in one of the comfortable chairs near the window overlooking the city. Please, call me Ethan, and thank you. That means a lot coming from someone with your expertise. As we dove into the details of her sustainability proposal, I found myself genuinely engaged in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Charlotte spoke passionately about renewable energy integration, waste reduction strategies, and community environmental programs. But what struck me most was how she really listened to my ideas and concerns. Your grandfather mentioned employee profit sharing in his company principles, she said, pulling out a tablet to show me some projections. What if we extended that concept to environmental benefits? Employees could earn bonuses based on the company meeting sustainability milestones. Creates personal investment in the environmental goals. That's brilliant, I said, leaning forward. To study her charts, it aligns financial incentives with environmental responsibility. Have you seen this approach work elsewhere? Actually, I helped implement something similar with a textile company in Oregon last year. Their carbon emissions dropped by 30% in the first year, and employee satisfaction scores went through the roof. We spent the next hour discussing implementation timelines, budget considerations, and potential challenges. Charlotte challenged my assumptions in ways that made me think more clearly, not defensively. When I expressed concern about shareholder resistance to the upfront costs, she didn't dismiss my worries or tell me to think bigger like Sophie used to do. Instead, she helped me work through the financial models to find solutions. You know, she said, as our meeting wound down, most executives I work with see environmental initiatives as necessary evils, something they have to do for public relations. You actually seem excited about the possibilities. I am, I admitted. I spent years working in traditional accounting, focusing on the bottom line. But this feels like building something that matters beyond just profit. Charlotte smiled, and I noticed it reached her eyes in a way that seemed completely genuine. That's refreshing. Usually, I have to spend half my presentations convincing companies that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive. She packed up her materials. I found myself not wanting the meeting to end. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation over dinner? To discuss the project timeline, I added quickly, not wanting to seem presumptuous. Like that, she said, then paused. Though fair warning, I'm going to keep challenging your ideas. It's kind of what I do. I'm counting on it, I replied, and meant it. That evening, we met at Garden Bistro, a small restaurant in the Arts District known for its farm-toteable menu. Charlotte had changed from her business attire into jeans and a soft green sweater, looking relaxed and approachable. Over locally sourced pasta and wine, our conversation flowed from business to books to travel to life philosophies. So what made you decide to take over the family business? She asked, twirling linguine around her fork. That must have been a big transition from accounting. I thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated involving Sophie. Self-discovery, and learning to embrace rather than hide from my identity. I realized I'd been living someone else's definition of who I should be, I said finally. Taking over White Industries felt like stepping into who I actually am, rather than who I thought I was supposed to be. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. I can relate to that. I spent my 20s trying to fit into traditional corporate consulting because I thought that's what success looked like. It took me years to realize that success for me meant doing work that aligned with my values, even if it meant less money and prestige. It was such a simple statement, but it hit me with unexpected force. Here was someone who had chosen authenticity over appearance, meaning over status. Someone who understood that real success wasn't about impressing others. It was about being true to yourself, for the first time since Sophie. I felt like I was talking to someone who saw me clearly and liked what she saw. 2 weeks later, Charlotte and I were having coffee at her favorite spot, Bean and Branch, discussing the final details of the sustainability rollout when my phone started buzzing incessantly. Text after text, call after call, all from numbers I didn't recognize. Everything okay? Charlotte asked, noticing my confused expression as I glanced at the screen. Before I could answer, my friend Daniel rushed through the cafe door, scanning the room until he spotted us. His face was flushed, and he looked like he'd been running. Ethan, thank God I found you, he said, breathing heavily. Have you seen the news? What news? I asked. But Daniel was already pulling out his phone, opening a video that made my stomach drop. It was footage from yesterday's press conference where I'd announced White Industries' billion-dollar commitment to renewable energy manufacturing. The news anchor was calling it one of the largest private environmental investments in state history, and there I was, on screen, confident and articulate, explaining our 5-year sustainability plan. This aired on every major network last night, Daniel said. Business channels, local news, even made the national morning shows. They're calling you the reluctant billionaire heir who's revolutionizing green manufacturing. My phone buzzed. Again, this time it was Jake calling. Ethan, you need to know. Sophie's been calling everyone we know, trying to get your new number. She saw the news coverage. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar knot form in my stomach. What did she say? That there's been a misunderstanding, and she needs to explain things to you. She's telling people you two had a fight, but never really broke up. Charlotte, who had been listening quietly, reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Sophie, before I could answer, a shadow fell across our table. I looked up to see Sophie herself standing there, looking stunning in a designer dress and heels, her hair and makeup perfect despite the fact that it was barely 10 a.m. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice honey-sweet. Then she turned to Charlotte, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be his business associate." "I'm Charlotte," she replied evenly, not removing her hand from mine. "His girlfriend." Sophie's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Oh, how nice. I'm Sophie, Ethan's." "Well, it's complicated," she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We have such a long history together," had I corrected firmly. "We had a history, past tense." Sophie pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, completely ignoring my correction. "Ethan, sweetheart, we need to talk. Privately. There are things Charlotte doesn't understand about us." "There is no us," I said. But Sophie continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we saw each other at that cafe," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I realize now that I was just scared of how much I loved you, scared of getting hurt. Times when people love someone so deeply, they push them away to protect themselves." Charlotte's eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained silent. Watching this performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing a fascinating but toxic specimen, "Sophie," I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building in my chest. "You didn't push me away because you loved me too much. You discarded me because you thought I wasn't successful enough for your image. That's not true." Sophie's voice rose, drawing glances from other cafe patrons. "I was trying to motivate you, to help you reach your potential. And Lakai was right. Look what you've accomplished since we've been apart." "Since you dumped me," I corrected. "Since we took a break," she insisted. "Ethan, honey, can't you see? This was all part of our journey. I helped push you to become the man you were meant to be." "We're perfect for each other now," Charlotte finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting. "So you're taking credit for his success? Success that came after you left him?" Sophie's mask slipped slightly as she turned to Charlotte. "You wouldn't understand. You haven't seen him at his worst, haven't been through what we've been through together. This is just a rebound, sweetie. He's just trying to prove something to himself." "You're right," Charlotte said, surprising both Sophie and me. "Seen him at his worst. I've only seen him as he actually is: intelligent, principled, passionate about making a difference. If that's somehow different from how he was with you, maybe you should ask yourself why." Sophie's composure finally cracked. "Look, whoever you are, you don't know him like I do. Ethan and I are soulmates. We're meant to be together, and once he gets over this phase, Sophie..." My voice cut through her rambling like a blade. "Stop." The cafe had gone noticeably quieter around us. Even the barista had stopped steaming milk to watch the drama unfold. "I want you to listen very carefully," I continued, meeting her eyes directly. "What you're doing right now, showing up uninvited, disrespecting my girlfriend, trying to rewrite our history, this is exactly why we didn't work. You can't accept reality when it doesn't match what you want." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but somehow they looked calculated rather than genuine. "Ethan, please, I made a mistake, but we..." can fix this. I love you." "No," I said simply. "You love the idea of me now that I come with a billion-dollar company and media attention. You never loved me when I was just Ethan from the accounting firm." I stood up, helping Charlotte gather her things. "We're leaving now. Please don't. Contact me again." As we walked toward the door, Sophie called out desperately, "You'll realize what you've lost, Ethan. She's just using you for your money." I turned back one final time. "Sophie, that's what you would do.
Oh.
Don't assume everyone else is like you." Outside the cafe, Charlotte was quiet until we were a block away. Then she stopped walking and looked at me seriously. "That was intense," she said. "Are you okay?" I realized I was more than okay. For the first time, I'd faced Sophie's manipulation without wavering, without doubt, without the old familiar guilt. "Yeah," I said, meaning it completely. "I really am." 1 year later, the ballroom at the Ashford Grand Hotel was filled with the soft chatter of 500 guests. The gentle clink of champagne glasses and the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. Tonight was the annual State Environmental Leadership Awards. And White Industries was being honored for our revolutionary manufacturing processes that had reduced industrial waste by 60% while creating over 3,000 new jobs. Adjusted my tie nervously as Charlotte approached, stunning in a midnight blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. We'd been together for 10 months now. She still took my breath away, not just because of how she looked, but because of who she was. "Stop fidgeting," she said with a smile, reaching up to straighten my tie. "You've earned this recognition." "Earned it," I corrected, taking her hand. "The environmental integration was your vision as much as mine." Charlotte's consulting firm had become White Industries' exclusive sustainability partner. And together we'd transformed not just my grandfather's company, but the entire manufacturing sector in our region. Other corporations were now scrambling to replicate our model. Charlotte had been featured on the cover of Environmental Business Weekly as the consultant revolutionizing corporate America. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed. "Across the ballroom, please welcome this year's Corporate Environmental Leadership Award recipient, Ethan White, CEO of White Industries." The applause was thunderous as I made my way to the stage, just looking out at the crowd. I saw familiar faces, employees whose lives had been improved by our profit-sharing program, community leaders whose towns had benefited from our clean energy initiatives, and environmental activists who had once been skeptical of any corporate involvement in their cause. "A year ago," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "I stood at a crossroads. I could have taken the easy path, sold my grandfather's company, invested the money conservatively, and lived a comfortable but unremarkable life. Instead, I chose to honor his vision while building something bigger than either of us had imagined." I found Charlotte in the crowd, her proud smile giving me strength to continue. "This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every employee who embraced change, every community partner who trusted us with their future, and every consultant who challenged us to think beyond profit margins. Real success isn't about how much wealth you accumulate, it's about how much positive impact you create." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. As I left the stage, clutching the Crystal Award, I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced during my years with Sophie. Later, during the networking portion of the evening, Charlotte and I were discussing potential expansion into solar manufacturing with a group of investors when I noticed a commotion near the bar. A woman was speaking loudly to a small group, her voice carrying over the ambient conversation. ... I actually dated Ethan for 3 years. I always knew he had potential, but honestly, I'm the one who pushed him to think bigger. If it weren't for me challenging him to be more ambitious, my stomach tightened as I recognized the voice. "Sophie, should we leave?" Charlotte asked quietly, following my gaze. Before I could answer, Sophie spotted us. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but there was something different about her, brittleness around the edges, a desperation in her too bright smile. Alexander Patel was nowhere to be seen. She approached us with the confidence of someone who belonged. Though I knew she hadn't been invited to this exclusive event, "Ethan, congratulations on your award," she said, air kissing my cheek before I could step away. I was just telling the Henderson Group investors about how I always knew you'd achieve something like this. Sophie, I said evenly, what are you doing here? I'm here with the Morrison Foundation, she replied, mentioning an environmental nonprofit I knew had been struggling financially. I'm their new development director, small world, right? Oh, Charlotte extended her hand politely. I don't think we were properly introduced last time. I'm Charlotte Taylor, Ethan's girlfriend in business. Partner. Sophie's smile became strained as she shook Charlotte's hand. Of course, still together, I see. How, ... sweet. You do yours next month, Charlotte replied calmly. I blinked in surprise it had really been that long since our first coffee meeting. Time had flown by in a blur of happiness and shared purpose. 2 years, Sophie repeated, her composure cracking slightly. Well, that's wonderful for you both. It really is, I said, putting my arm around Charlotte's waist. Never been happier. The simple truth of that statement seemed to hit Sophie like a physical blow. For just a moment, her mask dropped completely, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Genuine regret. Ethan, she said quietly, could we talk? Just for a minute, Charlotte squeezed my hand. I'll go get us some champagne, she said, understanding intuitively that this conversation needed to happen. Sophie and I walked to a quieter corner of the ballroom, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. You look happy, she said, and for the first time in all our interactions since the breakup, she sounded sincere. I am happy, I replied. Genuinely, completely happy. Sophie nodded, staring out at the cityscape. Alexander and I broke up 6 months ago. Turns out success and compatibility aren't the same thing. She laughed bitterly. It was everything I thought I wanted. Prestigious job, expensive taste, impressive social connections. But he was also cold, controlling, and ultimately ... empty. I waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. I made a mistake, Ethan. Not just in letting you go, but in never really seeing you. I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I missed what it actually looked like when it was standing right in front of me. Her admission should have felt vindication, but instead, I just felt sad for her. Sophie, I hope you find what you're really looking for, I said gently. But more than that, I hope you figure out who you really are when you're not trying to impress anyone. She looked at me for a long moment, tears threatening to spill from her perfectly made-up eyes. I think you were the only person who ever saw the real me and still wanted to be with me. I was too stupid to realize what that meant. Weren't stupid, I said. You were just afraid. But fear is no way to live a life. Charlotte appeared at my side, offering me a glass of champagne and nodding politely to Sophie. I should go, Sophie said, composing herself. Congratulations again, Ethan. You deserve all of this. She walked away. Charlotte slipped her hand into mine. You okay? I watched Sophie disappear into the crowd, feeling nothing but peace. Perfect, I said, and meant it completely. 6 months later, Charlotte and I were married in a small ceremony in her hometown, surrounded by people who loved us for exactly who we were. White Industries continued to grow and innovate, becoming a model for sustainable business practices worldwide. And every morning when I woke up next to the woman who had seen my heart and chosen to stay, I was reminded that the best things in life aren't the ones you chase there, the ones that choose you back. Sometimes the most extraordinary life is built not by becoming someone else, but by finally having the courage to be exactly who you are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.